Crimson fists, with fists of, well, crimson, I suppose. In this video, I'll be showing you how I painted up a collection of Space Marines, which originally came in the 5th edition starter box Assault on Blackreach. And coupled with that, I'll be talking about the rules for these units in the edition they were intended for. So let's take our stand against the greenskin menace, and get cozy in the nostalgia of Warhammer's past. It's time for another miniature escape with Miniscape. At the beginning of 2025, I embarked on a journey to paint the entire Assault on Blackreach starter set. I'd got this set off eBay for a fair price, and with a considerable amount of cleanup required, but I'm no stranger to buy a strip or a challenging restoration project. So far, I've painted the Crimson Fists Captain, the Orc Warboss, the Orc Boys, and Orc Knobs. With quite a throng of greenskins now bearing paint, I felt it was time for the Crimson Fists to catch up. The plan here was to assemble and paint the remaining Space Marine models, including the Dreadnought. Be rest assured, I'll show you examples of how I painted these models. First, let's make something out of this pile of Terminator bits. If you're thinking that these Terminators look like an old multi-part set, then you'd be right, but also wrong, because they're not. They're similar to this box, which was released during 4th edition, but these are push-fit Terminators. Each Terminator is composed of a legs and torso piece, a front torso piece, which includes the helmet or head, a power fist arm, and a Stormbolter arm. And they came on a 40mm base. There was some variety in the parts, so if you swapped them around a bit, you could have made 5 unique Marines. But from the set I have here, there seems to be 3 kinds of torso. 1 for the Sergeant, and 2 for the other Terminators. There's a few kinds of Stormbolter as well, but not 5 unique ones. The Power Fist arms have these little pauldron shields, which are like Bessagues, I suppose. Who wants to take a hit to the armpit anyway? Due to the previous owner gluing the model on an undesirable part of the base, I had to tear them off and stick them on new bases. But if this was brand new, it would have had a stud to push into a hole in the base. Here, you can see how the front part of the torso plugs into the rest of the model. And here, how the arms just push nicely on the body. Once each Terminator is assembled, a spot of PVA glue and sand are applied to the base. So when built, you have a Sergeant with Power Sword, and 4 other Terminators with Power Fists, and all of these are equipped with Stormbolters. Strangely, the set didn't come with a heavy weapon, such as an assault cannon or heavy flamer. I have left some of the push-fit arms unglued, in case I want to rectify that at a later date. Being a fan of old Warhammer miniatures, I tend to lean into those that come from the 90s rather than any other. But in the case of plastic Terminators, I'm a firm believer that these are superior to the plastic Terminators from 2nd edition 40k. You know, the ones that came with Space Hulk 2nd edition. I made a divisive video on them. Maybe check it out if you're bored. Let's have a look at this tactical squad. These are similar to the Space Marines that came with the previous starter set, Battle for Macragge. However, these have the tactical arrow sculpted into the shoulder pad. There are several distinctive sculpts, representing all kinds of marks of armour. This one, for instance, is a Mark 7 head, but the legs appear to be from Mark 4 power armour, judging by the knee pads anyway. I'm not sure which style of helmet this is, but the lack of knee pads makes me think that the legs are Mark 6. As you can see, the bolters come in various forms as well. This one has a scope, and the others come with a strap. Admittedly, these models still look quite rough, but I am confident my paint job can cover a multitude of sins. We have this missile launcher Space Marine. I like his fallback weapon, this holstered dagger. His missile launcher came in 2 parts which pushed together thusly, and then onto the torso. I believe this model was unique to this set at the time, though it was later included with one of the Battle of Vedros sets. These sets were a re-release of the Space Marine and Orc models from Assault on Blackreach, and a few other kits they perhaps wanted to cleanse from their warehouses. But that's just a theory. Truth be told, I don't know anything about stock rotation of model kits. This sergeant is another model which first appeared in Assault on Blackreach. He's pointing somewhere. I'm sure he doesn't even know what he's pointing at since he isn't looking in that direction. Maybe he's winding up for the chorus of Greased Lightning instead. He has a chainsword and bolt pistol which is holstered. His backpack has the mere sprout of a backpack pole. Maybe one day, if he keeps watering it, it will grow larger, and he'll be able to hang a banner from it. Now, the lot I bought did not come with the flamer. Big sad. However, I am not lacking in bits, so I chop off a couple of Space Marine hands and find a spare flamer. And all is right with the world again. And after a lot of chopping and gluing, that's 16 miniatures assembled, 10 tactical marines, 5 terminators, and a dreadnought. By the way, the sword for the Terminator Sergeant was wrecked beyond repair, so I salvaged another again from the depths of my bits box. If you had bought the starter set Assault on Blackreach, you will have seen this book, and in this book are some beauty shots of these Space Marine models, painted as Ultramarines. On the first page of the book, we can see the two most handsome chaps they could find playing with these miniatures. There's some guidelines on how to assemble your miniatures, and later, a simple method for painting your Space Marines. I guess it was this picture of 3 non-Ultramarine Space Marines, specifically the Crimson Fist, that made me think, yeah, I'd like to have a crack at that. Also, White Dwarf 345 shows a collection of Crimson Fists painted by Neil Hodgson, and these just look smashing. And in this article, Neil Hodgson tells us that Crimson Fists with 2 red hands are in fact veterans. I'll have to remember that little detail later. I can imagine the tension between 1 red-handed and 2 red-handed Crimson Fists being something like the tension at a university freshers' week, when students compare which schools they went to or how rich their parents are. There's a section in the booklet which gives you some statistics and rules for your Space Marine models. A regular Space Marine has 4s in everything but wounds, attacks, and leadership. They also have the typical power armor save of 3+. Now it says the Space Marines are equipped with bolt pistols. This is confirmed by the Codex entry. This is interesting because it means they have a choice of ranged weapons. Tell us something new, Miniscape, you may cry. Surely this was the case as far back as 2nd edition 40k, and is still the case in the current edition, whatever that is. Yes, it was definitely a thing back in 2nd edition, but it wasn't in 3rd edition. Tactical Space Marines only had bolt guns then. This was also true in 4th edition. I wonder why they brought it back for 5th edition. If you know the answer, do let me know in the comments. Anyway, like the tactical squads of old, your tactical squad from this box was equipped with a flamer and a missile launcher. This blurb gives you an idea of how they should be used on the battlefield. Fire support is the recommended tactic, so maybe don't go charging forward. Compared to the tactical squad, the captain had an extra pip of weapon skill, ballistic skill, and initiative. He had 2 more wounds, 2 more attacks, and an extra pip of leadership. But his armor save was the same. He probably hasn't been a captain for long enough to earn Artificer armor, though the 5th edition Codex does allow that for an extra 15 points. Terminators here have the same profile as regular Space Marines. Apart from that, they have an extra attack, an extra pip of leadership, and a better saving throw. The multi-melter armed dreadnought is apparently proof against most orc shooting, but presumably not against the Deathcopter's rocket launcher. It has that blender of a dreadnought close combat weapon and a multi-melter. I always thought that this was a strange choice. It has a 24-inch range and 1 shot. It's strength 8 and has the melter special rule, so it's the nightmare of vehicles. And how many vehicles do the orcs have in this set? 0. Because technically the Deathcopters count as jet bikes. Still, it could put some hurt on everything else. It's just a bit of overkill for anything other than a vehicle, in my opinion. According to this book, the points cost of all these Space Marines is 585. This doesn't quite tally with the 5th edition Codex, so I presume this is based on the 4th edition one, the picture of which is seen just above. Interestingly, this is quite a chunk more than the orcs, so if you are playing with these, Another mob of orcs, or another squadron of deathcopters, wouldn't go amiss. In Codex Space Marines for this edition, it should be noted that the Space Marine Captain is 100 points base. I'm not going to talk through the extensive war gear options and special rules here. That would be a whole video in and of itself. I know some people say my videos are like ASMR. Maybe I could do one of those where I just talk through a codex. We'll see. I do want to point out that his entry in 5th edition includes an Iron Halo. In fact, it includes a few pieces of war gear, whereas in 3rd and 4th edition, he came with basically nothing. Maybe like buying a Barbie doll without any clothes, although he did have his power armor, I suppose. I do love the massive amounts of customizability here. He can take different armor, different combi weapons, different ammunition and grenades. A jump pack, a Space Marine bike. He really could be a Swiss Army captain, or the precision blade of your wildest dreams. I've never made a captain on a bike before, but this entry makes me think I really need to do that at some point. The options are also extensive for tactical squads. 90 points gets you 5 Marines, with the option to add up to 5 more. You also get the usual special and heavy weapons options, and all manner of assault weapons for the Sergeant. It doesn't look like the Sergeant can be upgraded to a veteran here, though since he has an extra leadership and attack, perhaps he's already a veteran and it just goes without saying. And to put the tactical in tactical squad, you can also send them into battle in either a Rhino, or Razorback, or Drop Pod. Terminators are an elite's choice. 200 points gets you 5 Terminators. You can add 5 more for 40 points each. The war gear choices and heavy weapons choices are as you might expect, though it's nice that you can take a Land Raider as a dedicated transport, meaning it doesn't need to take up a precious heavy support choice. Raider of Land. I noticed that each of these units has the combat tactics special rule. Looking this up, it means that Space Marines that don't have the Fearless special rule may choose to automatically fail any morale check that they're called upon to make, presumably because they know when to call upon the better part of valor, and not stubbornly hold ground when they are likely to get pulped. I think I'd like to go back and play this edition again. It seems to have just the right amount of customizability. Time for the prime. I line the Marines up on my priming stick and give everything a blast with Colourforge Matte Black Primer, followed by another spray with Colourforge Republic Blue, though I avoid spraying this from underneath in order to leave some black showing in the shadows and recesses. Now this blue is a bit bright for the base coat of Crimson Fists, so I'm going to give it a glaze of Cantor Blue. This paint pot is well past its best, but I managed to salvage it by adding some medium and paint thinner. I say salvage, but it's got quite a strange consistency now. It's good enough for what I'm doing here, and you know me, I really can't be bothered to buy new paints when I can use the dregs such as this. So this goes all over the armour of the Sergeant here, which is the main model I'm going to be using for demonstrating how I painted these Crimson Fists. However, if I were you, I would just paint Cantor Blue over a black undercoat, or maybe just prime them in some dark blue spray paint. In the next step, I use Black Legion contrast paint to do some shading. Using a small brush, I carefully paint this where there's these grooves in the armour, such as on this leg plate here, and around the knee pads and the shoulder pads. It also goes on his under armour, and to base coat any areas that would be painted silver metal as well. On the Tactical Marines, this goes all over the bolt guns. In this step, I use Citadel Lotham Blue to edge highlight the armour, and I do this in all the typical places where there would be a 90-degree angle. For the record, I'm not precious about 90-degree angles. It's not like I get out my protractor and say, oh, that's not exactly 90 degrees, I'm not going to highlight that. No, I try to highlight all of the edges of the armour panels. Once this is done, I take some white paint and apply it to the sharpest edges, just to emphasise those. You can see I've put a scratch on the shoulder pad. Again, I highlight this with white. And this is how he looks after the shading and highlighting stages. Time to work on the chest. I'm using Vallejo Flat Brown. This will be the darkest colour visible after this step, and then I'll build up the highlights on top of that. This goes on any crux symbols, and also on the top of his banner pole, and his pistol holster. A Fiston Red was applied to his pointing hand. You know, to make him an actual Crimson Fist. And let me just pause here to preempt the fact that although I don't paint the other fist red on camera, I do eventually paint it red later. This red is also used to line his pistol holster, and it goes on the wax part of the Purity Seal. Fenrisian Grey was used to highlight the edge of the black sections, which I'm showing you here on the chainsword, using the edge of my brush. It's also used to highlight the ribs on the underarmour, which are visible behind the backs of his knees, and on his arms in some places. A mixture of the previous brown and Citadel Avalanche Sunset was used next to highlight all the feathers on the chest symbol, and the raised areas of the skulls, and the parts that have been painted brown before. Later, Avalanche Sunset Neat is used to highlight the tips of those same areas. We're kind of in the ugly stage here, but we'll get out of it with a bit of time and effort. I use Vallejo Dark Sand to paint this little loincloth and the Purity Seals. Then I use Gunmetal by Army Painter to paint the vents on the backpack and the teeth of the chainsword. After painting over the blue on his face with dark sand, I took some barbarian flesh and applied this over the top. I then painted tan earth in the shadows of the loincloth and on the Purity Seal. Some skeleton horde was painted over these, and yes, that means the initial dark sand step over the loincloth was a bit defunct. If I was doing this again, I think I'd just start with a base coat of tan earth. The head was shaded with Reichland Flesh Shade from Citadel. You can probably see here that his leather pouch has been highlighted with the yellowy brown mix I used earlier, and this is to make the leather look cracked and worn. Returning to the loincloth, I use a mix of tan earth and dark sand to paint the raised areas. And then I use dark sand mixed with a little white, painting small thin stripes perpendicular to the folds of the cloth. And again, this is repeated on the Purity Seal. And then the process was repeated once more, but with white alone, as the final highlight. His skin was given a highlight with barbarian flesh. And while that was drying, Metal and Alchemy Dwarven Gold was painted on these chains. And then Agrax Earthshade was painted on the metallic areas to shade them. Now the Sergeant is nearly done, but I was conscious that I wanted to do the other Space Marines a bit quicker. I opted to do the shading on these with an oil wash, by mixing some cheap black oil paint with methylated spirits. As you can see here, I'm slapping it everywhere indiscriminately on this Terminator with a dirty old brush. Off camera, I used some methylated spirits on a little sponge to remove that from the raised areas. I did this process on the Tactical Marines too, and to save time further, I gave them a little dry brush with a lighter blue to pick out the edges, which of course I repeated on the Terminators. Not being satisfied with the dry brush alone, I went back in with my small brush and some light blue paint to edge highlight the Terminator's armour. There's loads of edges to highlight on his helmet alone, but I feel this is a sound investment in time to get the look I wanted. Returning to the Sergeant, I used Citadel Evil Sun Scarlet to highlight the edges on his red fist, and the arrow on his shoulder pad, and the parts of the Purity Seal as well. Speaking of red, on the Terminators I really wanted to get a random texture appearance on the power fists, which I achieved by sponging on some Mephiston red paint, followed by sponging on some Evil Sun Scarlet. This technique resulted in the raised portions picking up more of the brighter colour. And at this stage, if I felt that the sponging led to there being too much paint on the piece, I just used a dry sponge to absorb some of the excess. The Stormbolters were given a base coat of Army Painter Gunmetal, and the furniture was painted Black Legion Contrast. On the Terminator shoulder pad, I gave it a base coat of flat brown, and tan earth was used to paint everywhere but the recesses. This was fiddly work, and I could have used a wash, but if time allows, I much prefer starting with a dark colour and building up highlights. I wouldn't say this is the right way of doing it, it's just my preference for what it's worth. A mixture of tan earth and dark sand was the final layer of highlight. This went on the Purity Seal as well, using these parallel strokes. The Assault on Black Reach set came with this set of transfers, so I chopped them off and moistened them on a kitchen towel bed so they don't float away, as they would do if I used a bowl of water or whatever. Microset was applied over a layer of gloss varnish. The decal was put in place thusly, and a microset filled cotton bud was used to smooth it down to get as many of the edges sticking to the surface as possible. Finally, a couple of rounds of microsol was used to help it conform to the curvature of the pad. Obviously, leaving each coat of microsol to dry before applying a new one. The bases of all the miniatures were dry brushed first with tan earth and then with dark sand, and tan earth was used on the rims later as well. I decided I wanted to tart up the Terminators a bit, so I painted their little shields with white paint to begin with. And then I freehanded on a red checker pattern, using variations on each Terminator. This was then washed with Agrax Earthshade. There's one final detail, but I'll show you that at the end. Here I'm using Warpstone Glow to paint the eye lenses green, which were later highlighted with Moot Green. And one last thing, I felt the red needed an extra highlight, which I painted with Evil Sun Scarlet, mixed with Barbarian Flesh. And after a spray of matte varnish, that was our fellas done. And there we have it, 17 Crimson Fist models ready to halt a greenskin horde, or die trying in the name of the Emperor. You can see on the Terminators I also added some black text to the shields and purity seals, which you can see elsewhere on the Space Marines where applicable. Looking at these clips, you may think that I haven't painted enough hands red, and you'd be right for the Terminators and the Veteran Sergeant, which is why I went back later and tidied this up. There now only remains 3 miniatures from the Assault on Blackreach set which I haven't painted, the 3 Deathcopters. So hopefully those will be joining the rest of this collection before the end of the year. And I know some of you have been goading me to make a battle report with these 2 mini-armies, so I'll do my best to make that happen. But I don't know when it will be due to other life commitments. Anyway, I hope you've been enjoying this series, and that you enjoyed this video. I know I didn't film any of the process of me painting the Dreadnought, but to be honest, I went into a lot of detail on this model when I painted one Imperial Fists, so you can see that video elsewhere on my channel. Be rest assured, I used the same techniques painting the Dreadnought as I did with the Space Marines. And if you like what I do, and this video pushed your buttons, then consider clicking all the relevant buttons, and perhaps checking out my Instagram. Or even tossing me a coin on Ko-fi. All support, whatever its form, is much appreciated. And with that, I better go paint some more miniatures. Take care, and thanks for watching.